The screams began before the first drop of blood hit the marble floor. Tonight was supposed to be a celebration, the night of the Gilded Scourge, the Empire's most sacred festival. Candles lit, wine poured, the whole high citadel dressed in white. But somewhere between the first toast and midnight, someone gave an order. And now the king's guards are moving through the nursery with swords drawn, not fighting soldiers, not hunting rebels, killing babies. Every child born under the black moon, every infant with those eyes, those strange, violet, wrong eyes, was to be silenced before sunrise. Because a prophecy said one of them would end the world. Or maybe, end the king. And in the crawlspace beneath the great altar, a woman named Vara pressed her bleeding fingers into cold stone and tried not to breathe. She was nobody, or a temple servant. The kind of woman people looked through rather than at. But in about 30 seconds, she was going to make the worst, or greatest, decision of her life. And the entire empire was going to burn because of it. Vara had worked in the high citadel for 11 years. She knew every crack in every wall, every guard rotation, every door that stuck, and every window that didn't lock right. She had survived 11 years by being forgettable, by keeping her head down, her mouth shut, and her opinions buried so deep she sometimes forgot she had any. Tonight she was supposed to be polishing silver in the East Wing. Instead, she was hiding under an altar while the world ended 6 feet above her head. She heard boots, she heard steel, she heard things she would never be able to unhear. And then, silence. One specific, or terrible silence, that meant the guards had reached the cradle room. Vara didn't make a plan. Plans take time. She just moved, crawling out from the stone, rising into the smoke-thick dark, grabbing the one thing in that room that was still breathing. The child was cold, impossibly cold for something alive. His eyes opened and found hers immediately, like he had been waiting, like he already knew her name. Violet. Deep, sourceless violet that didn't glow so much as pull. Vara had been a practical woman her entire life. She did not believe in prophecies. She did not believe in chosen ones or cursed bloodlines or the kind of fate that got written in the stars. She believed in what she could see and touch. Right now, she could see guards turning toward the doorway. She ran. The balcony was 40 feet above the Black River. Vara knew this because she had leaned over that railing 100 times over 11 years, watching the water churn below, thinking about how far down it looked. It looked the same now. Far. Dark. Unforgiving. Behind her, boots hammered stone. Someone was shouting her name, which was strange because she was sure nobody in this citadel had ever bothered to learn it. The child in her arms hadn't made a single sound. No crying, no panic. Just those open violet eyes watching her face like she was the most interesting thing he had ever seen. "Trust me," she thought at him. "I have no idea what I'm doing." She hit the railing. She looked down. She jumped. The water was cold enough to feel like hitting stone. She went under, came up gasping, and the current immediately tried to eat her. The Black River didn't flow so much as attack. All muscle and pressure and zero mercy. But she held on. She held on to the child who wasn't crying, whose skin was impossibly cold, whose eyes were still open even underwater, and still glowing that deep, terrible violet. And somehow, she couldn't explain it then, and never fully could later, the river seemed to loosen around them. Just slightly. Just enough. Like something was helping. Like the water itself was making a decision. She surfaced half a mile downstream, gasping and shaking, and dragged herself onto a mud bank in the dark. The child looked up at her. He smiled. Not a reflex. Not a random muscle movement. A real, knowing, deliberate smile. Vara stared at him for a long moment. "You're going to be a problem," she told him. She got up and kept moving. And here is where the story cracks open. Because 3 days later, in a safe house on the edge of the Empire's most forgotten city, Vara found the file. It was sewn into the lining of the child's swaddling cloth, thin as a whisper, written in a hand so careful it looked like fear made into ink. She read it once, then she read it again. Then she sat very still for a very long time. The file wasn't about the child, it was about her. Specifically, it was a record. A full accounting going back 32 years. Her birth, her placement in the temple, the name she had been given, and the name she had been born with, which were not the same name, and at the bottom, in different ink, written more recently, a single line that made the room feel smaller. She will come for him herself. She always does. That is the design. Vara had spent her life believing she was nobody. The file said she was the most important piece on the board, not because of power, not because of prophecy, because she had been placed. 11 years ago, someone had put her in that citadel specifically, so that on this exact night, she would be exactly where she was. Someone had built her life like a trap, and she had walked into it perfectly. The child gurgled from his makeshift bed in the corner. Those violet eyes, wide and calm. Vera looked at him. "Who put you in my arms?" she whispered. He couldn't answer. He was 3 days old, but somewhere, she was absolutely certain, someone already knew she had found the file. And they were smiling. His name was Diel. He found her on the 5th day, in the market of the border city, when she was trying to trade the last of her silver buttons for bread. He didn't approach like a threat. He approached like someone who had been looking for a long time and was very relieved to be done looking. Mid-40s. Quiet clothes, forgettable face, and Vara, who knew forgettable better than anyone, recognized it immediately as a choice, not a coincidence. She almost ran. "I'm not with the king," he said before she could move. "I'm with the people who've been keeping the king from finding you for 11 years. She stopped, but she didn't sit. Not yet. "Prove it," she said. He slid a piece of paper across the table. Her real name, her birth record, information that wasn't in any public file, information that should not exist outside the document she had found sewn into the swaddling cloth. Her stomach dropped. She sat down. "The prophecy," he said, "was never about one child destroying the empire. The king was given a version, a cut, weaponized version, designed to make him do exactly what he did. The massacre, the bodies, all of it." "Designed by who?" Vara asked. Diel paused just slightly too long. "By people who needed the king to show the empire what he really was," he said. "The child wasn't the weapon. His reaction to the child was the weapon." Vara looked at him, at his careful, forgettable face, at the pause that had lasted 1 second too long. Something in her went quiet and watchful, the same instinct that had kept her alive for 11 years in a citadel full of dangerous men. She didn't call it out, not yet. She filed it away. "What is his name?" she asked instead, looking down at Sorel. Diel was quiet for a moment. "That," he said, is the part you're not going to like." The child's name was Sorel, and Sorel was the king's son. Not a secret son, not a hidden heir. The king knew, had held him by the ankle in that room and raised the blade himself. And then the shadows moved, and the blade never fell, and Sorel disappeared, and the king had told his court that the child was dead. Had told them he had done it himself, which meant Vara was not just carrying a prophecy child. She was carrying the living proof that the sovereign god of the known empire was a liar. She turned this over in her mind for a long time. "He'll never stop looking," she said finally. "No," Dal agreed. "And if Sorel is ever seen, if anyone confirms he's alive, the king's entire divine claim collapses. A god who lied about killing his own son." Diel spread his hands. "3 factions have been waiting for exactly that. They move the moment we produce him." Vera looked at the baby. Sorel looked back. Calm. Those impossible eyes. Then, without warning, the candle on the table between them snuffed out. No wind, no draft. Sorel's eyes had shifted toward Diel, just for a moment, just long enough. Vera relit the candle and said nothing, but she watched Diel's hands after that. the way they had gone very still, the way he hadn't looked at the child again. "He's 4 days old," she said. "Yes. You're building a revolution around a 4-day-old baby." "We're building it around you," Dale corrected. "He's the proof. You're the story. And in this empire, stories move armies." Vara had spent her whole life being the woman nobody saw. She looked at Dale's careful, forgettable face. She thought about the file, so the life built around her like a cage she had never noticed. "Tell me the rest," she said, and she started counting his lies. That night, after Dale slept, Vara sat alone with a candle and the one question she couldn't shake. Why did the king really do it? Not the official reason, not the prophecy, the real reason, the thing underneath. She had cleaned that man's halls for 11 years, had poured wine at his banquets, had listened from doorways while he spoke to advisors, to generals, to priests. She knew the sound of his certainty, the specific weight of a man who had never once been told that he was wrong. The next morning, she asked Dale about the High Seer. He told her, and this part she believed, because it cost him something to say it. 3 days before the massacre, the king's own seer had gone to him with the full unedited prophecy, had told him the truth. The Black Moon Child was not a destroyer, was not an ending, was a mirror, born to show the empire what it had become. The king had listened to every word. Then he had ordered the seer's tongue removed, not because he didn't understand, because he understood perfectly. He didn't want a mirror. He had never wanted a mirror. He wanted permission, and when the truth refused to give it to him, he cut the truth out and built a smaller version that would. Vara sat with that for a long time. She thought about Sorel's eyes, the way they didn't so much glow as reflect, the way she had seen her own face in them in the river, frightened, determined, more alive than she had felt in years. She thought about what it meant to be a mirror in a world full of people who had learned not to look at themselves. "He cut out the truth," she said quietly. "Yes. And we're going to make the empire hear it anyway." Dale nodded. But that night, when she checked beneath the 3rd floorboard, where she had hidden the seer's written testimony, she counted the pages, and then she counted them again. 3 were missing. She didn't confront him. She already knew. She came back from the market the next afternoon to find the safe house empty. Sorrel gone. The files gone. Dale gone. On the table, a single coin. The king's face stamped on both sides. A currency that didn't exist publicly, used only between the crown's deepest informants. Vara stood in the empty room and felt the full architecture of it settle over her, like a stone ceiling coming down slowly. Dale had been the king's man the whole time. But it went deeper than that. The king hadn't lost Sorel on the night of the Gilded Scourge. He had allowed the child to be taken, had let the shadows move and the blade not fall, because a living Sorel, running across the empire in the arms of a servant woman, was worth more than a dead one. A story spreading, sympathy building, every rebel faction showing their hand, every hidden network activating, every enemy of the crown stepping into the light, all so the king could count them, all so he could find them, all so he could finish, in one clean motion, what the night of the Gilded Scourge started. Vara had not been a weapon in someone else's war. She had been bait. She sat on the floor, just for a moment, just long enough to let the full weight land without flinching from it. Then she stood up. Because here was the thing they had not accounted for. She had read the file. She knew the design. She had watched Dale's hands go still when the candle snuffed out. She had counted the pages. She had spent 11 years surviving by being the woman nobody saw. They had forgotten to account for how carefully invisible women watch. She reached under the loose 3rd floorboard. The 3 missing pages were decoys. She had switched them on the second night. The real testimony, the seer's full account, the king's handwriting on the order, all of it, was exactly where she had put it. She picked up Sorel's blanket from the empty cradle, pressed it to her face for just a moment. Then she went to find her son. She found Sorel in 4 days. Not because she was exceptional, because she knew how the king thought, had watched powerful men her entire life, had cleaned their rooms and poured their wine and listened from doorways. Powerful men hid things close to power, close to the symbols of what they believed they owned. Sorel was in the high citadel, back where it started. Not harmed, not in a cell, kept in a sealed room in the sovereign's private tower, in a cradle of black iron, surrounded by priests who were not praying but measuring, cataloging every flicker of the violet light, every movement of shadow, every drop in temperature. The king wasn't afraid of Sorel anymore. He was studying him, trying to understand the mirror before he destroyed it. Vara got in the same way she had survived 11 years. She was a servant. Saw she was forgettable. She walked through 3 checkpoints with her head down, clean uniform, tray of food that nobody questioned because nobody ever questioned the woman with the tray. She walked into the room. The priests looked up. Sorel looked up. The violet light in his eyes, which the priest's logs noted, had been dimming for days, going cold and gray in this room, flared, bright, warm, alive. The shadows moved. The priests ran. Vara picked him up and held him against her chest. He made a sound she hadn't heard before. Not a cry, not a laugh. Something between the two. Something that sounded, impossibly, like recognition. "I know," she told him. "Me neither." She looked at the door. The balcony. The river 40 feet below. Same river, different bridge, same cold, dark water. She thought about jumping again. Then she thought about everything she was carrying in her coat. She turned toward the forum chamber instead. This time she wasn't running. This time she was arriving. She walked into the grand forum at midday. No army, no rebels, no speech prepared. Just a woman in a servant's uniform, carrying a child and a coat full of truth. The king was on the dais, performing the daily blessing, reminding 10,000 people that he was divine and permanent and untouchable. His voice rolled across the forum like weather. He saw her before his guards did. She watched his face move through 5 things in 2 seconds. Shock, confusion, fury, calculation. And then, underneath all of it, something she had never expected to see on a god-king's face. Recognition, not of her, of the moment. The specific, where an irreversible moment when a story you have controlled for your entire life steps out of your hands. Vara held Sorel up. His eyes opened. That deep, sourceless violet filled the forum like a second sun, not blinding, not violent, just present, just undeniably, irrefutably alive. The crowd had been told this child was dead, had cheered his death, had felt the specific comfort of people who have been told the dangerous thing is gone. They were looking at it now. Vara reached into her coat and let the pages fall. Hundreds of them, caught by the forum wind, scattering across 10,000 upturned faces. The seer's testimony, the real prophecy, the king's own handwriting on the order to remove the tongue. The king raised his hand toward his guard. Nobody moved. The guards were reading. Everyone was reading. And then. And this was the part nobody had planned. The part that lived outside every design and every file and every careful manipulation. Sorel reached up and touched Vara's face. Just her cheek, just his small, cold hand against her jaw. And she felt it. Not magic. Not power. Just weight. The specific weight of something that chose you. She looked up at the king. He was still standing on his divine dais, still wearing his crown. But the forum had gone completely silent in a way that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with people who have just seen something they cannot unsee. He was simply a man who had cut out a tongue to protect a comfortable lie, a man who had held his own son over a stone floor, a man who was very small in a very large silence. The first person to kneel was a guard, then another, then someone in the crowd. Vara didn't watch the king after that. She looked down at Sorel. He was looking at her the same way he had in the river, like she was the most interesting thing he had ever seen. She pressed her cheek against his. The Empire could figure out the rest. And that is where we leave her. Not standing triumphant, not giving a speech, just a woman with a child pressed to her cheek, in a forum full of people finally willing to look at themselves. But I need you to sit with one thing before you go. The file said, she will come for him herself. She always does. That is the design. And she came. She did every single thing the design required. She grabbed the child. She jumped. She ran. She trusted the wrong man. She found the documents. She walked into the forum. Every step, exactly as written. So here is the question I want you to take into the comments. Was the last moment, Sorel reaching up to touch her face, was that in the design too? Or was that the first thing in this entire story that belonged to nobody's plan? Because if it was in the design, then Vera was never free. Not once. Not even at the end. But if it wasn't, then maybe the whole empire just changed because of one small, unplanned human moment that nobody saw coming. Drop your answer below. I read every single one. If this story moved you, like, subscribe, and share it with one person who loves dark fantasy. The algorithm needs that signal to put this in front of the people who would actually want it. The next chapter of this world is already written, and I promise you, what happens to Dael is worth coming back for. The king thought he ended the prophecy. He had no idea she was holding it. See you in the next one.